Welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable. This segment is how to defend your dealership from attacks. At our last event in November, we met our distinguished panel. They're here again with us today. They are Nikhil Kalani, who's the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at the Reynolds and Reynolds Company, Todd Skelton, who's the CEO of Ascendance Trucks, Ed Roberts, the COO of Bozard Ford Lincoln, and Brad Holton, the CEO and founder of Proton Dealership IT. So, gentlemen, want to talk to you a little bit about today about defending our dealership and taking it a little bit further. We had a great panel, got a lot of strong feedback in November. Nikhil, kind of set the stage for us, for our dealer audience. We need to be prepared, need to defend ourselves. Take us through some of the basics, and then we'll open up to our dealer panel.
Sure. I think where we are now, in a couple of months into this, we need to take stock of our situation. Do we feel strongly our IT is in the right place? Right, that's the foundation on which this house is built. Without that, nothing else is really going to be effective. So check your IT systems, work with your IT provider to make sure you're in good shape there. Then on top of that, do you have the right security layers? Is everything working as you expect? And if that's in place, now look at the paperwork aspects of this. Is your program looking healthy? Do you have the right policies written down? Is your staff trained? Are you able to have a conversation with your seniors about the status of your program? If you're not ready for that kind of conversation yet, I think it's time to look back at the entire stack, re-examine IT, re-examine security, examine your requirements from the FTC and put it all together and start having those conversations.
Nikhil, our dealer and manager audience is really great at retailing vehicles, servicing, selling parts, selling necessary maintenance and repairs. But a lot of things have changed in our industry since the late 1990s, the advent of the internet. That state of cybersecurity today, how have dealerships been handling it in recent years? Because we came up against this safeguard thing back in early December, and we were required to begin documenting the processes. So if you don't mind, touch on that.
So historically, dealers have been managing IT and security somewhat informally, and that leaves a lot of gaps. Right? To take this to the next level, you have to formalize the program. The attackers have only grown stronger. In the meantime, our weaknesses have also become more prevalent if they're not well managed, right? There's computers everywhere, data's everywhere. And if we don't have a handle on our IT assets, our data assets, I don't think that the business stands a chance to defend themselves. It's all too easy to get an attack into a network and detonate it from inside the network, right? So you have this explosion of ransomware inside a network if you don't have the right safeguards in place. So the major change really is the success of ransomware attacks. They've become so easy to do if you don't have the right protections. At the same time, because of that success, the protections that are available have evolved significantly. You really can contain these risks. It's a matter of taking those steps necessary, working with the right people, and then it can be contained and very well managed. So one has to move to a proactive stance. Don't wait to learn this the hard way. Make security a priority, and then risk can be very well controlled.
Todd Skelton, you know firsthand about how bad things can get. And we're greatly honored to have you, share some of that with us here today at the Fixed Ops Roundtable. Todd, take us through it, overseeing a very big, large dealer group, and I'm sure you had protections in place. So walk us through that.
Yeah, it was the beginning of the summer in 2020, and we just figured out that we were going to make it through COVID. And it was a Friday morning at the end of the month, as it always appears to be with these bad guys. And here our 56 dealerships and over $3 billion of revenue was completely shut down. So we got the phone call from one dealership, which is where the hack occurred. And within minutes, maybe an hour, the whole system we shut it down and we couldn't get it to come back. So I remember on Monday, my IT team, they were in the office in Boston, and they were drawing out this map. And I walked in and I said, what is that? What is that map? And they said, well, that's like 3 weeks. And I said, what does that mean, 3 weeks? And they said, well, that's when we think we can rebuild the whole network, start from scratch, and get you guys selling and servicing cars again. I said, whoa, time out. 3 weeks. Truth of the matter is, after many days, after me being convinced that an endpoint protection called Sentinel-1 was going to solve all my problems, I called Brad. And Brad said, Todd, that's great. Endpoint protection, Sentinel-1's amazing, but who's going to monitor that? I said, gee, I don't know. He said, well, it can tell you all the bad things that are going on, but if nobody's watching it, who is going to alert you to do something? And I said, well, sounds like you're going to be doing that, Brad. So we hired Proton to come in and basically clean up the mess. And I don't know, Brad, 2 weeks. I think it took us 2 weeks to literally get the business back to where we could at least function. Ted, it was an absolute disaster.
Todd, I can't imagine. I heard about it sometime later, third hand. All right, but walk us through that first day, that Friday, that weekend, that Monday, because in many ways, you're shut down, on all fronts, sales, service, parts, and so on.
Well, it's chaos because nobody knows exactly what to do. And the first thing you do is you call your insurance company, and the first thing they do is try to reach out to a vendor to try to start the process to figuring out whether the customer data was breached, right? Because at the end of the day, you can get the system back up, and we did, but did we breach customer data? Because that's when it becomes beyond a disaster. Unfortunately, in our case, that didn't happen, but it would have taken 5 to 6 weeks for us to really know the truth on that. So the second thing was, let's get this business back up and running. And we were writing handwritten repair orders. I know Ed can appreciate that as a prior fixed ops manager. Handwritten repair orders. The only system that worked was a dealership group that we had purchased that we hadn't moved over to our network. And it was just a couple of stores. And they weren't on the mainframe, so they weren't attacked. So we knew what regular business looked like, again, but it took us literally, Ted, the better of 3 or 4 weeks just to get moving along to where we could service our customers. And customers understood, but I guarantee we lost a lot of business.
Let's go back to the breach, Todd, if we may, just for my edification. So one store, I'm imagining one computer, and it affected all the other stores. Was it an email? Did you ever find out? Was it
worse than one store or one computer? One email address, one person clicking on an email that was ransomware, and basically it infiltrated itself through that store, which was one of our stores in the New Jersey area, and then it moved through the network like fire. And we shut the system down almost immediately, but yet it still got the majority of our systems.
And Todd, that's too. By the way, that, if I may, that is too easy. One email can take the whole thing down for all these dealerships.
One email. And I would say, and Brad could probably comment on this, we did have a certain level of protection. It wasn't like we were out there running on a mom and pop network. We did have a reasonable level of protection. But again, one email without the proper endpoint protection, and the bad guys, somebody clicks on it, the bad guys get in, and that's where the chaos starts. And it did. And I remember going in trying to find usable computers that were in the dealerships that hadn't been hacked, that we could at least limp along to be able to use off the network. It was quite an experience, Ted.
So to that point, most of the things we see now are fully automated attack vectors where something will spew out millions of emails. And there's one particular we see a lot called the Emotet. So what Emotet will do, it is a fully automated system. It'll send out 5 million emails. All right, out of those 5 million, it only needs 1, 2, 3 to make it worthwhile. All right, so somebody clicks on it, they don't have good endpoint detection in place. So they open up a Word document, and they click on something, it has a macro, or they just open it with a macro attached, and all of a sudden they've infected the computer. Now what happens is, and remember, this is fully automated. This is not a hacker on somebody's, in his mother's basement, sitting on the couch wearing a hoodie, trying to attack a dealership. This is a fully automated, well-funded, system, with hundreds of employees sitting in office buildings in Eastern Europe. All right, so they're automating this platform, and it's going crazy. As it gets into this one computer, first thing it does, it scans the computer. It dumps all the passwords out of Chrome, Edge, Firefox, any browsers. It's going to dump all your email. So not only is it going to dump your email, it's going to take your last 90 days of conversation. This is where it gets really interesting. It uses a very unique social engineering system. So it takes the last 90 days of email conversation. Now, if you think about this, Todd, think about the last 90 days of email in your inbox right now. Who have you talked to? What conversations have you had? So it takes it off, and then it sends replies back to every email you've gotten in the last 90 days. And it says, hey, and it's got the same subject line as whatever email you guys talked about. So you might have talked about something, in the dealership, could be, something with a vendor, could be anything, right? But whatever conversation you guys talked about, it's going to reply to that, and then it's going to add an attachment to it. So when the person gets the email from you, it looks like it's coming from Todd Skelton. Well, it's not. It's coming from a fictitious email address, but if you just first glance at it, the display name's Todd Skelton, so you think it's Todd, right? And it's got the subject line that you and Todd talked about, just in the last 2 weeks. So, and it's got the same body, only now it just says "see attached." And so you go down and you click and you open the Word document, and now you're infected. You don't have the right tools and procedures and processes in place. So while it's doing that, it's replicating itself, and that's how it's spreading super fast. It's using that social engineering. But at the same time, as it's doing that spreading, it's dumping your Chrome passwords, your email passwords, your banking passwords. It's scanning your whole network. It's looking for point of sale systems. It's attempting to infiltrate every switch, every access point, every firewall, every other PC or server on your network. So it's running laterally. Once it does all that, it basically builds a score and says, okay, we've only found 5 computers. This is a home PC. It's not worth doing anything with. Or it says, we found 26 networks, and we found, 450 PCs and 12 servers. Well, now all of a sudden it raises that score up. And now this is when you start seeing a human component come in, and somebody actually starts paying attention. Now you've got a real live hacker who's going, oh, wait a minute, this looks good. We've got something here with, servers and PCs. And so now they start actually kind of scoring it and going after. And at that point, they're going to decide, okay, what are the keys to the kingdom here? Where's the crown jewels? They're going to find all the data. They're going to scan the network. They're going to look for backups to make sure they can destroy them. And then once they know they've got everything, they've got the backups destroyed, they know where all the data is, they're going to take a small piece of the data, they're going to exfiltrate it, and they're going to use that to drip out to you later to convince you that they've gotten all your data. Typically, they don't have all your data. They've only gotten a small bit, but they just look to try to find things that say, invoices or HR data or consumer data. They'll take that off, put it aside, and then they'll send a command out to every single device simultaneously. So the way that it moves around the network is not hopping from PC to PC. They send a command to every single device simultaneously using a tool called PowerShell Empire that then blows out every single computer simultaneously. So, as soon as you see it on one, it's also happening simultaneously on all the others. And there's literally no time to respond to it. Typically they do it, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock Eastern time tends to be the time they really like to do it. So when you come in Monday morning, nothing works. Email's down. All the computers are down. DMS doesn't work. Unless you can, use a Foursquare to sell a car, and you got a guy's good on a napkin with a pencil, you're not selling any cars, for that day or maybe even the next week.
So Todd, this is how it happened to you.
That's it. That's exactly the way it went down. Who knows exactly what time it started, but they did all that preliminary work, and then what we found that part in the morning is when all those commands had been sent out to those computers, and that's where all the computers became what we call bricks. Yep. And a brick is useless. It's a piece of equipment that's a shell that is worthless.
So if Ed Roberts sent me an email, Brad, and normally that would be in the course of business during the course of any day, I would reply to that. It would have to have an attachment, though, in order to infect the system. Is that correct or no?
Well, there's 2 ways that we see. There's a link which takes you to a website where you could download something without realizing it. But typically, you have to interact. Just having it in your inbox and opening it is not going to do anything. It's got to be some sort of interaction. Now, there actually is a hack that came out just about a month ago that uses the preview pane in Outlook that they actually found if they do a certain thing in a Word document, they can actually use that to launch a tool. So it's always changing. It's a cat and mouse game. Every single week, we see a different type of attack, a different threat vector. And so you've always got to have, you've got to be on top of it. It's a ever-changing landscape every single day.
Ed, it sounds too easy. I know you have not been a victim of the ransomware, but you know others who have.
I do, and listening to Todd's story just scares me, because he's really speaking of it from being a high level. But I'll get it down to nuts and bolts for you guys in a minute. But just think about the education that we're delivering to our audience here, Ted. I mean, this is huge, because education is key here. We talk this stuff all the time, but when you hear it from a third party, you hear it from someone that lives this world every single day, from Brad and Nikhil, the education of our people going back and understanding that it's a link, it's this, it's whatever, is unmeasurable. But let's go back to what Todd had to live there for a minute, and in the store where you guys are out in the audience, where you can't cash a customer out in service because you can't pull up his invoice. You can't write up a customer because you can't pull up his information. You can't order a part because you can't see, you don't know whether you have it in inventory or not. You can't look it up. You can't sell a vehicle because you don't know your accounting cost of it. So everything's a guessing game all throughout the store. And yes, if you took one in on trade yesterday, you knew what you put it in Rico, you might be able to sell one or two, but that's not the norm. And it shuts down the business. So it's not only what it costs you to get out of it, it's the cost of lost production along the way as well. And the consumer experience that we're going to send our customers through when you experience it, because it's not pleasant for them either. They can't come in, they can't get their vehicle, they can't bring their vehicle in and get it serviced. It continues to just compound itself. So take this education and learn from it.
Ed, we didn't even talk about it because it's the least relevant piece. But once you get past all this, you have to change all your equipment. Most of the time, we spent over $10 million on equipment replacement. Now, some of it needed to be replaced, which is part of the reason why this happened in the first place. But all of it didn't need to be replaced. But this caused that. So you've got that coming at you too. So either spend the money now and harden your system and hire folks that are professionals at what they do, because let's agree, this is not a core competency of me, of any CEO, of any executive, of any manager, of any dealership. It's just not a core competency. So go hire a professional that can manage the process and keep yourself out of the chance of this happening to you.
Absolutely. It's not hard with the right guide, and we got to make sure we have the right guide to carry us through it. We can't try to take this on ourselves. Like Todd said, they had some equipment needed to be replaced, but it wasn't on the schedule to be replaced yet. So he was forced to replace all of the equipment. And yes, did he come out good on the other side of that? Well, it depends on how you look at that. Because ultimately we wanted to depreciate stuff out and get the time frame out of it, but we couldn't. We had to instantly flip a switch and swap it all out. So it is imperative to have the right guide to carry you through it and protect yourself as much as possible.
Yeah, and one of the things we see, as well, is when it does happen, nobody knows what to do. Everybody just says, all right, what do we do? And then you have all these competing interests, right? So I've had to battle many a times with attorneys that, work for the insurance company, and they bring in the insurance consultants that do the forensic, and they want to know, okay, well, where did it start? So nothing happens until we figure out which email was clicked. And they will literally bring everything to a standstill for 2 weeks and say, you can't touch any computer, you can't do anything until we know how it happened. I don't care how it happened. I already know how it happened, right? I already have a pretty good idea of, I can tell within the first hour or 2 hours, and we'll have a pretty good understanding of, we might not know exactly where patient zero is, but we can narrow it down within 2 hours. But they want to do a forensic evaluation of every single device. So
when I think about this, Brad, if we had you, it most likely wouldn't have happened. But let's say it did. Let's say that these guys can get into almost anything. Let's say they do get in, and now you've got a managed provider that's doing this for you. It's a whole different ballgame than that chaos which ensued when he's exactly right. We call the insurance company. They got a set of lawyers who put us with another set of lawyers who want to know, they want to send us this particular company, and we don't know about that company. So we try to find a company. So my telephone network guy goes and tries to find the best company. And then I think, oh my gosh, Brad, that's who we need to go get. But had I not thought about that, we would have been dealing with this for God knows how long.
Yeah, we had a call from a group with, they had about 16 locations. They'd been down for about 2 weeks, hadn't been able to do anything for 2 weeks. And they literally hadn't done much of anything because they were waiting on the insurance company and the attorneys to give them the okay to get back to work. Meanwhile, the insurance guys had brought in some forensic guys that were making their money billable time by the hour, just going through every single PC. So, of course, they want to touch all 1,200 PCs. and nobody goes back to work until they've given the okay. So you've really got to have a strong advocate to come in and say, okay, we're not just focused on, the absolute figuring out what happened. We're also focusing on getting back to work, because every time you can't do an RO and somebody goes down the street, you've now lost that customer, right? Unless there's some real specific reason for them to come back to you. If your service department's down for 10 days or 14 days or 20 days, those customers aren't coming back. They now have a new relationship. Those guys have taken great care of them. And all of a sudden, it's not just what did you lose right then, because you probably have business interruption insurance that's going to, accommodate for some of that. But it's what did you lose long term with every one of those customers that went somewhere else, bought somewhere else, got service somewhere else, and now have a new relationship.
Well,
Brad, if I may, and Nick, I'll come to you in just a moment. I got to ask this question though, Brad. How often is this happening? I mean, we know how many dealers there are in the United States. How often is your phone ringing and you're hearing that there's another one or another group or another single point store that's been infected?
What time is it? I mean, that's kind of, it happens constantly. I would say at least every week, I probably get a call from someone who's a current client. This is, hey, I talked to someone at our 20 group, or, they just came, I just got a note from someone. I gave them your name. They're in the middle of this right now. We get referred in probably once a week, every other week, something like that. There's some sort of an incident going on. It's kind of the loudest secret in the automotive world is everybody gets together at a 20 group and they all talk about it, and everybody comes away and they're all focused on, man, I can't be the next one. I've got to do something about this. And then, 2 weeks later, it's like, I really need to get focused on doing those EV chargers in the parking lot. And they've forgotten all about it. So we see it constantly. And some dealers really do kind of stay with it once they figure out one of the, the dealers they know got hit. Others, short-term memory, move on to something else.
And Nikhil, it sounds like I need more than one level of protection. Go ahead.
Oh, no doubt. As painful as this is, it is still a highly preventable situation. But it works in layers, right? Protection works in layers. You've got to have basic good network protection, good firewall, and has some intelligence to it, not just old firewall from several years ago. So the technology has evolved, right? We can't just have any product out there and expect it to do the job. So we've got to have the right product, fairly modern, which has intelligence to it. So good firewall, that's the basic network protection. Good email filter, because most of these attacks are happening via email. So email is actually the number one attack vector in the world right now. So strong email filter is just a key protection. Then the email gets to an endpoint where it's opened, right? Preferably not opened by a smart user, right? So security awareness training is a key part of this. That's another layer, the human factor, another layer. And in fact, in Reynolds, we call it the human firewall because they're very much part of the solution overall. But let's say that the user did click on the attachment or the link, then the endpoint protection program has to take over. An attack may start, but it needs to be shut down really very quickly. Okay, old antivirus doesn't work anymore. I mean, it's dead. You've got to have something called EDR, endpoint detection and response. So every letter matters at detection and response. What these are looking for is behavior. What is the intention? What's the behavior of this program being run right now? The attachment being run or the file being downloaded? What can we see? How is it progressing? So typically there's a little bit of a start, and it's minor, nothing to worry about. But as soon as it sees the detection of a behavior that's malicious, shuts it down. So these layers working together, they work. Now, if you have all of this, but you're not actually monitoring it, you're still leaving yourself open, because technology works really well, but you've got to have the right people who know, what is this alert saying? Is this serious? Is it not serious? So the 24/7 monitoring puts the whole thing together. Without that, it's an incomplete solution. Typically, the attacks are happening nights and weekends. That's the pain point, right? That's typically when most IT departments are not at work. So the attackers want to find the most painful point to inflict the damage. So that's why you need a 24/7, 365-day coverage. So all of this together, it can really reduce the risk to a very, very manageable level, very preventable.
And to that note, I had a call, that's been a few months now, with a dealer principal at about 22 locations. And they were going through a ransomware. They'd been down about 2 weeks. Same thing, fighting with the insurance company and the attorneys and everybody else. But as I'm talking to the guy, it's real late at night. He called me, he got my name from another dealer. It was 11 o'clock at night. We finally get a call scheduled, and he's just walking me through everything. And he said, "Yeah," he said, he said last year, we had something real similar, and it cost us over $1 million to pay the ransom, and I just didn't think we were going to have this again." And I literally almost dropped the phone. I mean, I just didn't know how to react. Right? It was last year over $1 million paid. And he walked me through, and I said, "Well, I don't understand. How did this happen?" He said, "Well, we got all these things put in place, but apparently we didn't have anybody monitoring it, and we didn't have it set to actually remediate anything. So they had a really good endpoint product, but it wasn't licensed for most of the features. It was alerting to an email that nobody was looking at, and as a result, it wasn't set to automatically, fix anything. It wasn't aggressive, and nobody did anything with it. So the same IT guy was in charge, after the breach as before the breach. He was still the same IT guy that was in charge during this breach. And I explained that you should probably play golf with them, invite them to dinner, but you might want to just make some changes on how you're handling IT. You got to have 24/7 monitoring. You got to have a team that's actually kind of responding and looking at everything in real time all the time, or it's going to get past you.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it really is. It's the profession of these guys that's out there, and they're not just chasing the same way every single time. They're always looking for a new way to come in and attack us. And that's why we got to have guys like you to come out and say, "Hey, this is what's out here now. This is what we got to work towards." And so I'm glad you mentioned that about the guy getting hit, or talking about it happening again, because that's what we think. A lot of times we think that, all right, we've been there, we've done that, we've been through it, we're good. But it's ongoing. It's their profession. That's what they're going to do. They're going to find new ways to get in.
And Todd, this would seem like a tall order for any dealership, let alone a group, to be able to tackle on their own. And, you told us about that and the importance of reaching out to the professionals.
Yeah, I think it would have taken, I've tried to estimate how long it would have taken us to put it all back together and just limp along. And it could have been 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, it's a big network. It's a lot of people. We had over 3,000 employees at the time. And you got to think about that too. These folks want to go back to work. And then there's one more piece we didn't really talk about. And that is, if there is a consumer breach, can you imagine the phone calls that are coming, because it gets out? And a few of my general managers had very, very difficult conversations with customers who were deeply concerned, as they should be, that their information had gotten leaked, when in fact it hadn't. So you've got that piece of it. It never ends. It just keeps going in terms of the things that could come up, on the negative side of this thing. You need a professional.
Brad, we're taking a lot of notes and listening, and it's frightening, the attack that we're under in the retail car business. If we're looking at a cybersecurity firm like Proton, what are the next steps? How do we protect ourselves? Because you're seeing this every day firsthand.
I mean, first thing you've got to do is interview some partners, figure out who's got the skill set, who's familiar with automotive specifically, and who can bring a 24/7 cybersecurity team in to kind of help facilitate all this. And then I would even say, okay, let's not just get a partner that does this. Let's get somebody else, a third party, that maybe your accounting firm, that can audit and say, okay, we'll come in and do an annual audit of what your IT team is doing. All right. It's not something you can just hand over to someone and say, okay, I've hired Proton, it's good. Well, I mean, Proton's going to do a great job, and whatever you hired is going to try their best. But it's got to be something that the dealer principal actually is so focused on and so aware of, that they sit down with that partner every year and say, okay, where are we at? What are we doing? What are we not doing that we should be doing? What else is there? Go to events where you can learn about new topics outside of just the normal things you're doing. So become aware of it. Really make it a top focus, and then bring in the right partners and vendors to kind of do all those pieces to get everything locked down. Because to your point, you don't want to be the one sitting up there. Back in 2019, December 2019, we had a breach we responded to, and it was a Monday morning. Dealer woke up, email didn't work, and then realized that all the dealers had been hit, five large stores. And by 2 p.m., I get a phone call. We just got engaged with the dealer around 8 a.m., 9 a.m. We started working with them, trying to figure out what's going on. By 2 p.m., he calls me and he's got a reporter sitting in his office, and a lady had shown up to get her car, and she just bought a new car, and they couldn't close it out because everything was down, and the employee didn't know what to say, so he told, sorry, we can't do your car right now. We're in the middle of a ransomware attack. 2 hours later, the local TV station's got the antenna going up on the van in the middle of the parking lot, and they're broadcasting live from this dealership group. Dealer puts me on the phone, and I was able to at least say, hey, based on what we've seen so far, no consumer data was on this network, so that piece is off the, off. We're not worried about that one. We're just getting through the rest of the stuff. But just having to deal with that and face that consumer backlash is, it's priceless. There's no number you can put on that from a lost trust or potentially just lost value of your biggest asset, which is your dealership, right? I mean, that's everything. It's your legacy. If you're not putting the time and energy to protect that reputation, then you could have a pretty ugly scare coming.
Fixed Ops Roundtable community, you're all hearing this firsthand. I know Reynolds and Reynolds, Nikhil, is not going to go with just anyone in this arena. I know you've looked at a lot of potential partners. I'll give you the last word, Nikhil. What made you decide on Proton, and why did you see that perhaps as the best choice for your valuable asset, the dealerships and their clients?
In this particular arena, whom you work with, it really, really matters, right? We're fighting a battle against technically competent attackers. It's a highly technical field, right? So as a defender, you have to have technical strength at all layers, not just at engineering level, but even the company's leadership has to be technical. At Reynolds, we're a technical company, right? We build DMS products, we build several products. That's our strength. We saw in Proton, Brad's a technical leader, right? When you're selecting whom to work with, the leadership really matters. So there are many players in this particular marketplace. My advice to the dealers would be, look at the leadership, decide, are they really truly the right guys to work with? For example, you can have companies that are very focused on compliance, right? That's part of the picture for the FTC, yes. But the hacker doesn't care about your compliance. Right? The hacker cares about how do they exfiltrate data, how do they get you at a technical level. So establish your position, make sure that you're technically sound, and then from there you can build your compliance house as well. So in working with Proton, we saw that we have a company here it's technically highly competent. That's what matters.
Love it. Well, we'll leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Fascinating conversation, extremely timely. Todd, I'm sure our dealer audience can reach out to you, one-on-one through social media for your feedback and your recommendations on Proton as well.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yep, love it. Want to thank Nikhil from Reynolds & Reynolds, Todd Skelton, Ed Roberts, and Brad Holton from Proton Dealership IT. Along the bottom of the tick, everybody, is the website for Proton. You can reach out directly to them and to the gentleman here on the screen. Great conversation. On behalf of the Fixed Ops Roundtable community, I want to thank the cybersecurity panel here today at the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
Thanks, Ted.
Thank you, Ted.